أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته everybody.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you for joining us today. So just to sort of explain what's going on here. So we were originally going to do the subjects of nihilism, but obviously there's been a number of things that have been kicking off recently, and we felt it more paramount to discuss this particular topic instead, and to just postpone the discussion on nihilism for the next episode, inshallah. So that has been rescheduled, and we're just going to jump straight into this particular one today. So forgive us for that, but like we say, we think this is more important. So yeah, obviously quite a heavy subject. We've got a few guests in mind that we're hoping will join us today, inshallah. Including Dr. Finkelstein, I think, who should be joining. You're muted, Sharif.
Dr. Norman Finkelstein.
And so he's going to be joining us at about 5:30, inshallah, for about half an hour. And then beyond that, we've sent an open invite to a few other duat. So we're not 100% sure who may join us after the 6 o'clock mark. But hopefully we'll get a few other people as well to sort of to give their words. So yeah, assalamu alaikum to the brothers. How are you all this merry eve?
Wa alaikum salam. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Obviously, we're all thinking, we're all concerned about what's going on in Palestine at this moment in time. So our du'as, our supplications, they go out to the Muslims and to the people out there. And so, I think it's very important, like you mentioned, that we discuss this issue, because at the moment what we're seeing here is there's like outside of that particular area of conflict, there is like another conflict that's going on, and it's the conflict of the narrative. Whose narrative gets pushed into the mainstream, into the wider society? And I think it's very important that we try to sort of clarify what's going on in this region, how to view it. Even just as an objective, impartial observer. But obviously, as Muslims, we're not just simply objective, impartial observers who are just looking at this. We are concerned even, from the basis of our own belief system from Islam. But even those people who may not be Muslim can look at this situation, can recognize that there is a gross injustice that's taking place. Maybe some of the discussions we can get through, inshallah, but one of the key discussions we need to sort of really hit is this idea that there's some sort of, it's very confusing, I just can't get it, I don't get it. They all seem to be fighting. Why can't they just, seek peace? As though they're both equal parties to the conflict. Yeah. And I think one thing that needs to be very clear is that one group of people are the occupiers and another group of people are the occupied. One group has a state, the other group doesn't. One group has got all the infrastructures of a state, and the other group are individuals trying to operate under an occupation without any, rights equivalent to the occupiers. So I think, I didn't mean to go on.
No, because what you're touching on there is very important, because even like within people that I've spoke to myself, and friends of friends and the family members and things like that, this is a common thing that keeps sort of getting pushed by sort of the general layman that haven't really been plugged into this too much, and probably only really get a lot of the information that they get on the issue from the general media or the papers, or the random news that's sort of pushed forward about it. And there's a very problematic notion that's been put forward, and that is, as you say there, that these are two equal parties, that they're quote unquote as bad as each other, and that that this is something that's quite simple and that could be resolved if they just stopped fighting one another. But it really isn't as simple as that, and the escalations have been.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry. Yes.
No, good.
I was going to say that's at the very best. At the very best, they will say they try to equivocate. So there's Palestinians, the Israelis, they're just as bad as each other. That's the very best of what the media, in terms of the narrative. The very worst is effectively saying that Palestinians are the ones that constantly instigate the violence, that Israelis are the ones that want to live in peace, and that somehow if it wasn't for these pesky Palestinians, there would be peace. And that's generally the more overt narrative, particularly, in the West. That's the overt narrative that comes out within the media and amongst the politicians. So if you look at what the politicians are saying in regards to this, they will condemn unequivocally Hamas, call it a terrorist organization. But when it comes to Israel, they will say, they have a right to self-defense. In the same way, it's always positioned as though Israel's rocket, launch of rocket attacks against airstrikes against Gaza and other areas are a response to Hamas's rocket attacks, as though the world and the conflict only started as soon as Hamas does something. So, I think we need to be really clear as to who the aggressor is and the occupier, who's the one that's being transgressed, and to really, go beyond the political narratives which have a political agenda with regards to this.
Definitely. Abdulrahman or Jake, would you like to jump in and give a few comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like you guys said, we needed to change the stream from nihilism to talking about this, because this is a hot topic. It's a very sensitive topic, but I think it needed to be addressed. And, just touching on something a little bit different than what Sharif had mentioned, there is this narrative going around, like Sharif is saying, well, it just seems like both sides are equal and they're both doing bad things. And, hopefully during the stream we'll kind of explain why that isn't really the case. And then the second thing for me personally that is most concerning, which I feel a lot of people in the West are unfamiliar with, is the history of the region and how Israel was formed, over the past 75 to 100 years. Is just totally unacceptable. The amount of oppression that's gone on to the Palestinian people. So hopefully, through talking with Dr. Finkelstein and as well as playing some clips and giving our commentary on it, we can explain that the history of how the state of Israel was formed is just, totally unacceptable. So with that being said, I don't want to take up too much time. Abdul, I don't know if you have anything you want to add before we go to this video.
Of course, we did find that it would be a bit inappropriate to go into a philosophical topic like nihilism while this is going on. Although there might be a bit of relevance between the topic and these incidents, but it's very important to address for a number of reasons. The primary reason that this is of great importance is public awareness. As Jake put it, specifically in the West, a lot of people don't really know what's going on. And, the mainstream media narratives don't really give you a full picture. And most of the time they actually could give you a distorted picture of what's happening. You have these basic cliche one-liners that the media puts out, for example, about Israel having the right to defend itself, about, how they frame the Palestinian side as a terrorist opposition to a legitimate state, and this a lot of time it can be taken for granted. Not everyone is really to blame for this, but it's very important to put things into perspective, because a lot of times when you hear many of these very oversimplified statements about the conflict, like for example, Israel has the right to defend itself, a very generic statement that doesn't really give you a comprehensive overview of the history of the conflict and the history of the state of Israel and how it treated the indigenous inhabitants of the land, both Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, before the state of Israel. And it doesn't really give you a full picture of the mass expulsions that the Palestinians have faced in the past, and how several massacres have occurred with regard to the Palestinian people. And it's not really just a one-sided conflict where there is a legitimate state and then there is some kind of illegitimate resistance terrorizing the peaceful state of Israel. A lot of people need to understand that there are two sides to the story, and oftentimes the one side that they get isn't just one-sided, but it's also distorted.
Definitely, and as well, like this notion of so someone's already sort of mentioned it in the comments that, like, for example, Hamas use human shields, and it's basically this narrative that sort of paints or demonizes the Palestinian people to make them seem like they're constantly doing abhorrent things and this and the other. One thing that they often overlook when they make comments like this is that Palestine is what's left of it now in terms of the Gaza Strip and things like that. It's surrounded by all sides. There isn't many places for these people to go. And there is no like non-civilian areas. Like it's heavily populated, and if there is any sort of response or resistance to the provocations of the Israeli state, there's not really many places that they don't even have an armed force. They don't even have an army. So where are these people supposed to go in order to make responses and things like that? And then there's all these questions about the whether the force that the Israeli state applies, whether it's proportional, whether it's equivalent to two states fighting one another, or whether it's a fully grown man beating something. And obviously, this isn't to say the Palestinian people are children, but like a fully grown man that has been training in martial arts, fighting a young person that's not equipped physically to be able to actually respond to like a one-on-one battle with someone much larger than they are in terms of military strength, in terms of military capabilities. So all of these sort of the questions that we're going to be exploring today, inshallah. And it's also this notion we need to dispel of the idea that this is some sort of ancient problem, as if the Palestinians and the Israelis have been at each other's throats for thousands and thousands of years. This isn't true at all. This is far from true. This conflict is a recent one, and it began with the Zionist movement. That is, it began with the idea that there needs to be a state for the Jewish people, and that particular state must be the land of Palestine. And so that began with the British. Sort of, they owned that territory. I think it was just after the First World War that they signed an agreement which came into conflict with previous agreements that they'd already made with the Palestinian people of their own right to self-rule. And despite having this agreement with the Palestinian people, they made another agreement. I can't remember the name of it. Was it the Declaration of something?
Yeah, there was the Balfour Declaration in 1917 by the British politician Arthur Balfour. But it needs to be understood that the land of Palestine had been under Muslim rule since 1188. Yeah, what I mean is that was after the Crusades. So after Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah, he defeated the Crusaders in about 1188, and prior to that period, then it had been under Muslim rule since the 7th century or so. So we're talking about 1,200 years, except for the 88-year period, under Crusader rule. But for over 1,200 years, Palestine has been under Muslim lands. And then when the Ottomani Khilafah was defeated in the First World War, the British colonized the Palestinian region. And when it colonized the Palestinian region, it then, Arthur Balfour, Lord Balfour, made his famous declaration where he wrote a letter declaring that he will promise Palestine to the Zionists as well. So, that was the initial, impetus from it. The British colonized the land, and then, we're basically going to give it to some European Zionists.
Yeah. And historically as well, so the Jews had done quite well in the Arab lands, specifically in Jerusalem, for centuries before all of this conflict had kicked off. And counter to the narrative that's often put forward, they were even often doing a lot better than they were in, say, for example, Europe, where there was constant aggro between the Jewish population and the Europeans. And this is like historically been shown to be the case, that they thrived. There's popular apologists from the Jewish side which are quite happy to even openly admit this. Tovia Singer being one person who's mentioned that the Jewish population often thrived under Islamic rule, even in the not specifically just with regards to Jerusalem, but during the Crusades into Andalus, or into what is now known as Spain. The only reason that the Jewish population were able to survive that, because it wasn't just the Muslims that the Spanish Crusaders were sort of dealing a very harsh hand to, but it was also the Jewish population. And the Jewish people were able to survive that because they fled into Northern Africa, into the Arab lands, and they were able to establish communities there and grow, and they have done for centuries. And this notion that the Muslims and the Jews have constantly been at each other's throats is a false one. This notion.
I mean, the whole point of the mass migrations that I think started in the 19th century and carried out through the 20th century were basically a means for the Jews of Europe to escape persecution, and they did find these Muslim ruled lands to be a safe refuge for them. I mean, that's indisputable, and that's generally that's where the idea of Zionism came from, which is basically Jewish nationalism, the idea that okay, we need a place for us, right? And what better place than this refuge that you already have, where you are living peacefully side by side amongst the Muslims. Of course, I don't think the intentions were along the lines of living peacefully with people, but then the mass migrations that occurred, because from the stats that I saw, the Jews made up from 5 to 7% of the Palestinian population under the Ottoman rule, and they were living peacefully side by side. And the area of sorry, I'm not talking about specifically Jerusalem, but the region of Palestine, and specifically Jerusalem, there were it was divided pretty evenly in terms of population, and the thing is that this mass immigration reached a point where the Jewish population moved from 7% up to 30%, and it started forming the basic skeletal structure of that Zionist plan that they wanted to implement, and it happened through whatever means that followed that, in collaboration with the British, who promised the Jewish people of Europe a Jewish state before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Before there was any loss on behalf of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. So I think the foundation of this whole Zionist idea was on the basis of this very safe refuge that the Jews of Europe had when it came to the persecution they faced by whether it was the Russians or the Germans or the Polish or otherwise.
The British as well.
Oh, the British as well. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to also add to that point, was that Zionist movement. What is interesting about the Zionist movement is that it's a relatively modern movement. It's a modern movement that came about in the late 19th century by a person called Theodor Herzl, who, as Abdulrahman has mentioned, argued that the Jews in Europe are never accepted as part of Europe, and so therefore the Jews are a specific people that requires specific land. And what was quite interesting to know is that Theodor Herzl was known to be, or it's been mentioned that he was an atheist, so he didn't even believe in Judaism, and that's why you have Orthodox Haredi Jews who don't even accept the concept of the state of Israel, because they say that God has commanded them into exile, and it's only when the Messiah returns that they can come back to Jerusalem. But what was the point here is that Theodor Herzl pushed this idea of Zionism, that the Jews require a specific homeland, What was interesting is that Jews in Europe, a lot of them criticized Zionism. They criticized this idea because they said, no, we should be fighting for our rights living in this homeland that we're in, whether that's Britain or whether that is, France or Germany, wherever it was, that actually we should be, if we're told to, if in essence, if you're told you've got another land, we'll all be forced out. We would all be forced out and pushed into this new land. So that's why there was a big concern that, and Jews themselves are actually quite concerned. And those proponents amongst the British government who said, yeah, we will promise the Jews a homeland, were also some of the biggest anti-Semites. So Arthur Balfour, on the one hand, he's promising Palestine to the Zionists, to the Jews, but at the same time, he's preventing immigration into Britain if you're Jewish. Yeah. So they were creating the circumstances that where the persecution was taking hold within Europe, where they weren't able to go into places like Britain or other places. And so as a result, they were being pushed into Palestine for ulterior colonialist agendas that Britain had at that particular time.
Yeah, I just want to add to that the idea of this Jewish state, right, is not that, as refugees, we want to live peacefully in this, in this land alongside its indigenous residents, and because that was welcomed all along by the Muslim ruling Ottoman Empire, and as well as the Muslim populations that followed. They always lived peacefully side by side amongst Jews and Christians. But the issue is this idea of a Jewish state. So this idea of a Jewish state, which didn't just result in oppressed Jews moving to this land to peacefully live alongside its Arab residents. It involved a mass expelling of Palestinian residents from their homes. I think it was up to 700,000 after the Second World War, which is regarded by the Palestinians as the Nakba. Right, so it's this idea of a state with a Jewish identity, right? Not exactly an inclusive Jewish identity where Palestinians would be treated equally, and where the citizens would have equal rights regardless of religion. Yeah,
Abdulrahman, I think Dr. Norman Finkelstein is able to join us. I think. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. Let's get him on.
Hello,
Dr. Norman
Finkelstein. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Great to have you. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah. So guys, obviously, Dr. Norman is a very special guest. Most of you probably do know him. Just going to give a brief intro here. Dr. Norman Finkelstein is an American political scientist and activist. His primary areas of research are the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and he received his PhD from the politics department of the Princeton University in 1988. He's the author of 10 books. I'm not sure if that's updated information, but up to 10 books that have been translated.
I think it's overdated. I don't think I've written 10 books.
This is from your website, though, so I guess they'll have to correct that. But then
yesterday, 11 books. They talk about writing books like it's tea bags. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, well, this is the information on your website, and it says that you've written 10 books translated into 54 foreign editions.
My wonderful web manager, Sana Qasim, she's a Palestinian, lives in Greece. Brilliant woman, a chemist.
Yeah.
That was the website. I don't know anything about the web. I don't know anything about social media. I've never been on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any of that other crap. So I don't know what's on my website.
Well, you've been a huge influence in this area, and I'm sure many of us here recognize that anybody who's concerned with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict knows your name and definitely knows of your work. So we're very happy to have you here, and I guess we'll get right into it. I mean, with basically the context of what's happening right now in mind, I guess we wanted to just ask you a few questions to get a bit of insight on the situation. So I want to start with this idea of Israel's right to defend itself with what's going on right now, because that's a common theme we hear these days, as if, so to speak, both sides have blood on their hands, which might generally be true, but it's as if they're on equal grounding, and Israel has a right to defend itself against the terrorists of Palestine. What would you say to that?
Okay, just hold on. I want to just grab a book. Hold it for a moment.
Sure.
While he's doing that, we could play a clip.
Because Dr. Finkelstein actually wrote a book that's related to this very question, which is on Gaza. So you might be grabbing that. Yes,
it's sorry, it's Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom. I think it's that one.
I've muted him just for a sec. I don't know what's going to go on with that phone call.
I think because Dr. Norman Finkelstein's not on for too long, it's probably best not to play any clips, just in case.
Yeah, let's just have him answer the questions in his own time. Then we can play the clips later, inshallah.
Sure.
But yeah,
so I can't find it. So let's talk about your question. Does Israel have the right to self-defense? In 2003, one of Israel's leading sociologists at the Hebrew University, his name was Baruch Kimmerling. He's since passed away. He wrote a book called Politicide, and he described Gaza in 2003. I want you to keep in mind the year for what I'm going to say to you in a moment. In 2003, he described Gaza as the largest concentration camp ever. That was a senior sociologist at the Hebrew University, an eminent sociologist. Now, Gaza in 2003 was kind of a dreamland as compared to what it has become, because the blockade of Gaza didn't begin in full force until 2006, when Israel imposed the blockade in retaliation for the parliamentary elections, which former US President Jimmy Carter called fair and free elections, in which the civilian wing of Hamas won the election. So the people of Gaza were punished for participating in democratic elections and electing the wrong party to power from the point of view of the US and Israel. And then the blockade was imposed on Gaza. The blockade was tightened in 2007 when the United States, Israel, and some Palestinian collaborators attempted a coup against the legally elected government of Hamas, and the coup was preempted, it was foiled. So, for the past 15 years, let's see what Gaza looks like. Two facts begin any discussion of Gaza. 70% of Gaza's population are refugees and descendants of refugees. They were the ones who were expelled from Israel in 1947. Number two, one half or more, a little more than half, of Gaza's 2.1 million people are children. They're under the age of 18. So you have an overwhelmingly refugee population. You have an overwhelmingly child population. Now, because of that illegal, immoral, that criminal blockade of Gaza, 80% of the people of Gaza are in humanitarian aid relief. because Israel doesn't let anything in or anything out above the bare minimum to survive. 96% of the water in Gaza, according to the World Health Organization, is unfit for human consumption. Every few years, Israel launches another murderous massacre of Gaza. In 2007 to 8, it was Operation Cast Lead. In 2012, it was Operation Pillar of Defense. In 2014, it was Operation Protective Edge. Gaza. You know what Gaza is? You know what Gaza is? It's the length of a marathon. It's a little less than a marathon. A marathon in our measurements, it's 26.2 miles. Gaza is 25 miles in length. In width, I use the example from my own hometown. It's about a little more than twice the size of Central Park. That's Gaza. That's Gaza. The length of a marathon, the width, about twice the length of Central Park. That's Gaza. That tiny sliver of land that these heartless, murderous hordes, these Mongol hordes, have been suffocating since 2006, leaving aside all the atrocities it committed in Gaza before 2006. That's a whole other story. Just to take one of the massacres it committed during the Israeli, British, French invasion of Egypt in 1956. Pick up this comic book, a sophisticated comic book, a very sophisticated comic book by Joe Sacco, Sacco, to read about the stories of the massacres in Gaza in 1956. They lined up several hundred Palestinians in Gaza and shot them dead. That's right. They lined them up and shot them dead. That's already ancient history. And then you ask yourself a simple question. According to Human Rights Watch in its recent report called The Threshold Crossed, it said that Israel's committing, I'm using their language, crimes against humanity in Gaza. Listen to the terminology, crimes against humanity. That's at a higher level than war crimes under international law. As Human Rights Watch says, crimes against humanity are, quote, among the most odious crimes, ODIOUS, among the most odious crimes in international law. So now you ask yourself a simple question. It is so simple that maybe even some people in university professorships could understand it. It's that simple. Ask yourself the question, do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense? Do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense?
Dr. Norman, if I could just
Brew Kimmerling called Gaza a concentration camp, where I say it was like a paradise. Next now. So the question is so stupid. It's beyond words. There are 1 million and more children who are trapped in Gaza. 1 million or more children trapped in Gaza, daily consuming water that is unfit for human consumption. And you're asking me whether the power, the concentration camp guards and their seniors, whether they have the right to self-defense. In the real world, It's such an insane question. I don't even understand how sophisticated, serious human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, how they can use terminology like that. I know some of these people. I respect some of these people. But to me, it's kind of mind-boggling. I assume they're parents. They have children. They know that more than half the population of Gaza is children. How can you possibly believe a state that's trapping 1 million children in a concentration camp can have a right to self-defense? To me, that is so lunatic.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Norman, and maybe
I would say that to my mother and father.
Yeah. So this follow-up question might even seem more insane or lunatic. So I hope you have the patience to answer it. Someone with Zionist inclinations might push back and say that the history of Hamas precedes that of their rule over Gaza, and that they were basically incorporated or established as a military movement dedicated to the annihilation of any notion of a Jewish state or a Zionist state. So Israel right now would be basically preempting a self-defense so that they don't basically get wiped away, as per the main motive of Hamas in the first place.
When you look at the Nazi defenders, the actual Einsatzgruppen, those were the killing squads of the Nazis. So one of the Einsatzgruppen leaders was asked, how do you justify killing Jewish children? How do you justify killing Jewish children? And he said, well, it's simple. Because after what they did to their parents, when they grow up, they're going to want to kill us. So we're going to kill them first.
Yeah, basically the same answer.
That's the kind of logic you're telling me.
Yes.
That's the kind of logic you're telling me. Because we killed their parents, they're probably going to be very angry, which is probably true. And so when they grow up, they probably will want to kill us, which is also probably true. So we should kill them now. Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me now. Yeah, A, B, C. I have an idea. I have a good idea. Here's my idea. Don't kill their parents. And then you won't have to kill them. How about treating them like human beings first and see how they react? You expelled them from their homes in 1947. According to Human Rights Watch, that was a crime against humanity. In fact, according to Human Rights Watch, if you look at their report, they say all those refugees have a right to return to their home. They still do right now. That's what the law is. That's what the law is. You may not like the law. You may think the law is unfair. Hey, the Native Americans get to go back to New York City. Okay, you can quarrel with Human Rights Watch about that. But the law is they have the right to return. That's the law. So I say, start obeying the law. Start treating them like human beings. Stop carrying on, to use the words of B'Tselem, Israel's leading human rights organization. Stop carrying on like Jewish supremacists. Or, to use the expression of Human Rights Watch, stop trying to institute a regime of Jewish domination. Carry on like you're not Übermenschen, supermen. Carry on like Arabs aren't Untermenschen, subhumans. In other words, stop carrying on like Nazis. And then let's see, maybe you can live together. Maybe you can figure it out.
Yeah, and
I would tell them, let's start from the beginning. Stop committing crimes against humanity. And if you've committed them, try to rectify them. And if it's hard to rectify them, then sit down with them and see where you can get. Figure it out. I've been to Gaza. I've been to the occupied territories. I know Palestinians. perfectly reasonable people. Of course, there are crazy people among them. There are crazy people in every population. But in general, perfectly reasonable people. You can talk to them. If they have leaders who are unreasonable, the population will react by rejecting their leadership. That's what populations really usually do.
Yeah.
And
So Doctor,
so long as they have the democratic power to express their opinion, as they did in 2006, as I said, I think most Palestinians are reasonable. My impression. Reasonable people, you could probably reach a reasonable settlement of the conflict and move on. But don't carry on like you have the right to torture these people, to torment these people, and then react in shock when they fire a bunch of fireworks at your country. If you look at right now, last night and this morning, I was curious based on my own research and writing on the past Israeli massacres. I started to go carefully through the web. I never use the web. I hate the web. Okay, I hate the web. But I started to look through the web. What actual damage have these rockets done to Israel this time? You hear all these horror stories, 2,300 rockets fired so far. 2,300 rockets fired so far. You would expect massive, huge destruction and death in Gaza. In Israel. And then you look at it.
So I have the statistics here as well.
Practically nothing.
And with this extreme disproportional, like the disproportional numbers that we have on the screen.
There's a little confusion here. Or go back to our look. You can always make the argument that there are far more many Palestinian deaths than Israeli deaths because Israelis have bomb shelters. And they do have a very effective homeland shelter system. It's a complicated one with cell phones, the whole thing. So you can make the argument. So that can explain the disparity in deaths, but that can't explain the disparity in infrastructural damage because homes, hospitals, government offices, they don't go into shelters. So the interesting statistic is they say that Hamas has fired 2,300 lethal rockets at Israel. And what is a country supposed to do? And don't we have the right to self-defense? Well, I'm sorry, concentration camp guards don't have the right to self-defense, but let's leave that aside. Let's look at the actual record. What kind of barrage are you facing? And then you start looking. I looked up May 12th, which is when the Hamas projectiles began, May 13th, May 14th, May 15th, May 16th. There was practically nothing. So people say, oh, what about they had to close down the airport? Well, guess what? They also closed down the airport in 2014. It was for one day. And there was nothing in 2014. There was no damage. Look at the statistics. Look at the numbers. I looked at the numbers. I looked very carefully at them. In 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, they destroyed 18,000 Palestinian homes. 18,000, these Mongol hordes. They destroyed 18,000 Palestinian homes. Remember, these are the homes of people who are already evicted from their homeland. And now their homes are being destroyed. They destroyed, you know how many Israeli homes were destroyed? You remember in 2014, the Hamas rockets. Go look at the numbers. Brace yourself. One Israeli home was destroyed. And my guess is Hamas fired its bottle rockets. and it probably hit the boiler room of a home. These aren't rockets.
Yeah, Dr. Norman, with these, like, I hate to cut you off. I just want to get as many questions as I can in. With these disproportionate numbers we're seeing, and with the disproportionate artillery that each side has in hand, clearly it's uncomparable. When it's so obvious like this, why do you think that the Western governments give their utmost support to Israel? And I saw yesterday that the U.S. representative, what was his name, Ned Price, U.S. State Department spokesman, when he said that Israel has a right to defend himself, the journalist kind of pushed back and told him, well, do Palestinians? And he's sort of stumbled and stuttered on the words and couldn't really answer and give a straightforward answer that they do. Why is it that Western governments are explicitly in support of Israel despite the clear inhumane acts that Israel commits?
Look, that question has so many dimensions to it. The answer to it is it's not that it's complicated, because there's nothing in politics that's intrinsically complicated. It's that it's multidimensional. If you want to look for a single answer, it's very rare. It's almost in any political situation. It's like when you look at yourself, when you do some noble deed, is it pure? Or do you have other self-interested motives, some vanity motives? So even when we attempt to be as pure as we can as human beings, it's very hard, because there's always an alloy of motives. And then when you get to politics, it's very hard to sort it out. I would say in the current situation, President Biden, he has a long history of support for Israel. His administration support, it's old timers, even new old timers, all people who've already gone through the bureaucracy. And it's kind of a reflex. They don't even think about it. You support Israel, they don't even remember why, but they know you're supposed to support Israel. So part of it is a reflex. Part of it is the US government, all the governments in the Middle East, aside at this moment from Iran, they're all worried about popular uprisings among their own people. So you can be sure that Netanyahu is telling Sisi in Egypt, if Hamas wins, what kind of impact it's going to have among the Egyptian Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, who Sisi overthrew in the coup, the army coup. It's going to energize them, so you too want to suppress them. And Israel is saying the same thing to Jordan. You don't want to energize those Palestinians living in Jordan, do you? You don't want to give them hope. And so all the leaders have a common interest in suppressing this popular resistance in Gaza. So that's a kind of what you might call a generic response. There is a kind of instinctive response by US administrations. And then there's the generic response by all of these governments in power who are terrified at this popular resistance to brutal regimes. And now the popular resistance in Gaza has spread to inside Israel, less so the West Bank. Well, what do you think this message sends to Sisi? His people are not exactly thrilled with his leadership. What do you think the lesson it sends to Jordan, the Jordanian leadership, Abdullah? So they all are terrified of popular resistance, especially as they watch it spread. It starts in Gaza, then in a blink of an eye, it's now in Lud, it's in Haifa, it's in Jaffa. So they're terrified, all of them, of that prospect. And then, of course, there's the view that Iran and Hezbollah are party to the resistance in Gaza. So, of course, the Saudis, who see the whole region as the Iranian axis versus them, they're terrified of what's going on in Gaza because it seems, in their view, it's another victory for Iran. It's Yemen, it's Syria, and now it's Gaza. So they're terrified. They're also terrified. I'll tell you why they're also terrified. Because the Saudi parasites, they look for foreign governments to pull their chestnuts out of the fire. They can't fight. Saudis can't do anything. Saudis can just barely get out of the bed in the morning. And now they see this sliver of land that's been hermetically sealed for 15 years. It's actually humbling the regional superpower, their superpower, Saudi superpower. The Saudis are hoping that, the Israelis with the Americans would bail them out in conflict with Iran. And now Israel is having a hard time with Gaza, So there are so many factors at play, and it would take probably hours to sort them out. And then once you sort them out, you then have to balance them. It's a complicated picture, but I'll tell you.
Yeah, I understand.
I have no love for Biden. Yeah. For sure, I have no love for Biden. I mean, you can't hate the guy because he's a corpse. So I can't say I hate him, but I have no love for him. If I loved him, I'd have to be a necrophiliac, which I'm not. So I don't hate him, I don't love him. But I kind of disagree with people who are criticizing him now, because I kind of think Biden is quietly telling Netanyahu, you can't take this further. We're now in, I guess it's a week now of the Israeli murderous assaults in Gaza, and it's about 200 people dead. And for every loss of life, it's there but the grace of God go I. It could be me. So we don't want to trivialize any loss of life.
Of course, however, I was wondering, Dr.
However, just from perspective, on day one of Operation Cast Lead in 2008, day one, the first 5 minutes, Israel bombed a graduation ceremony in Gaza. It was police officers, not army, just traffic cops. It bombed a graduation ceremony. In the first 5 minutes, it killed between 200 and 300 people, young people at the graduation ceremony. So compared to that, and not wanting to in any way diminish the intensity of the bombing, it's huge. It's shaking the earth, tremors. It's actually rather mild compared to what Israel has done in the past. Now, I don't know where it's going to go, but so far, I think personally, no proof, total speculation. Always have to say, when you have facts and when you have speculation, total speculation. I think Biden is the reason for that. I think Biden is saying, look, I have 14 members of the Security Council who want to pass a ceasefire resolution. I'm holding them off. I'm doing you a favor. I'm holding them off. I'm getting messages from our ambassadors in Iraq, where there was a demonstration yesterday. I've never seen a demonstration like that. It looked like the whole country was out. And there are protests in Jordan. There are protests in Lebanon. And Biden says, and now I have all these young Congress people who are attacking me. So Biden is saying, look, I'll support you, but no major massacres. No major massacres, because if you carry out a major massacre, and don't tell me it's an accident. I know you can carry out a massacre or not carry out a massacre. You have the capability. So don't give me the BS about accidents and misfires and malfunctions. You don't carry out any massacre or you lose me or I'm out. I'm out. And that's why I think it's, for Israel, those Mongol hordes, it's relatively, compared to the past, it's been controlled. And there's been two high rises demolished. I think the second will be the last, because AP, you don't attack AP, you don't attack Associated Press. Not smart move, Israel. Not smart move. And AP is now, passing on its discontent to the State Department. And I think my guess is, pure speculation, Biden communicated to them, listen, guys, you don't attack AP. That's my country. You don't attack AP. So I would say probably behind the scenes, especially because Biden wants to be a FDR. He wants to be what they call a transformative president. He doesn't want to get bogged down, sucked in to this Israeli lunacy. He doesn't want to, especially because he doesn't like Netanyahu. He remembers how Netanyahu carried on during the Obama administration when he was the vice president, when this obnoxious Jewish supremacist, racist head of state barged into our Congress and lectures the US government, of which he was the vice president, on what they should know about Iran. Like, we spend tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars on our military, on our intelligence, but we need the Jewish supremacist geniuses, the Ubermenschen, the supermen, to come to our Congress and tell us what we don't know. I don't think Biden liked that. And it's still that same Jewish supremacist, obnoxious Ubermenschen who's the head of state there. So Biden's heart is not into it. His hope for a legacy is not into it. He doesn't want to be distracted and diverted from his aspiration to be a transformative president by this obnoxious, racist, supremacist state. So I don't think his heart is even into it. He does what he has to do. It's default. Default in this is we support Israel. But behind the scenes, I kind of think it's probably not true.
Just very quickly, Dr. Norman, if we could link all this to what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, because that's where all of this conflict is sourced, and we know this started with a litigation about property ownership and whatnot, and there's a historical background to it, and it's complex as well. But if very briefly you could tell us how you see the situation as it relates to Sheikh Jarrah.
It's not complex. I'm not going to get into the legal technicalities because I don't know them and I don't feel I need to know them, frankly. First of all, before we continue, we have to do a time check. What time is it?
By your time,
it's
it would
1:07 p.m.
Yeah.
I can only go on for 5 more minutes because I have to do another interview. If you don't,
this will be the last question, then, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I hate saying things like that. I've got to do another interview like I'm Michael Jackson.
we respect the fact that you have many things going on these days, of course.
Not that I would want to be Michael Jackson, dead or alive, but we'll end on this note. What happened in Sheikh Jarrah, you don't need the legal technicalities. It's just the same thing that happens literally, no poetry, no hyperbole, no exaggeration. It happens every minute of every day in that area. Israel had 2 goals on its creation, 2 objectives at its creation in 1948, even before 48, but we'll start from the creation of the state. And you find this in the Human Rights Watch report, the threshold crossed. It starts in 1948, 47, 48. It says, Israel wants to create a state with a Jewish majority. And the way it creates a state with a Jewish majority is as follows. Number one, it forcibly evicts a large portion of the population. It forcibly evicts them, and they became the Palestinian refugees. That was the first step in creating the Jewish majority. And then they engage in this massive land confiscation, which they saw as part of a critical part, not just a part, a critical part of creating a Jewish state. So for them, a Jewish state meant an overwhelming Jewish majority demographically and control over all the land in their state. And so they begin by passing laws which dispossess all those Palestinians who were forced into exile, dispossess them of their land. And then step two was dispossessing the Palestinians who remained of their land. So what we now call the Palestinian Israelis, they were dispossessed of about 2 million dunams of land. The estimate is between 40 and 60% of the land of the Palestinians who remained in Israel was stolen. I don't know why I'm using the word dispossessed. Why do I need a polysyllabic word when I can just use a two-syllable word? Stolen, or use a one-syllable word, or robbed by the Israeli state. And this process of dispossession, it never stopped. It didn't stop for a day, really, literally. They're constantly coming up with new plans and new plans to confine the Palestinians in a smaller and smaller and smaller area. I'm talking about inside Israel itself, in a smaller and smaller area. So Palestinians now comprise 19% of the Israeli population, and they're confined overwhelmingly to 3% of the land of Israel. I'm talking about the state of Israel. I'm not talking about the occupied Palestinian territory. About 3% of the land. And then, when they acquired in the June 1967 war the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, they began the same process. They want, as they put it, the famous line of Levi Eshkol, who was the prime minister at the time in 67, he said, we want the dowry, we don't want the bride. We want the land, we don't want the people. And so the same process begins of dispossessing them of their land. In the case of the West Bank, the state of Israel has taken control now of 30% of the land. 1/3 is Israeli. And it's used only for Jews. It's only for Jews. And in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is a kind of microcosm of the whole picture, because in East Jerusalem, they have a special commitment to maintaining the Jewish majority. And part of maintaining the Jewish majority is confining Palestinians to less and less land in Jerusalem and giving over more and more to Jewish settlers to create, maintain, preserve, and enhance that Jewish majority. And so Sheikh Jarrah, it was a kind of a fluke. It was a complete fluke, because they do that every day. You read the reports, you listen to the news. They've been doing that to the Bedouins in the Negev. for the past few years. And every day you hear a new horror story in the Negev of what they're doing with the Bedouins there, trying to confine them in a smaller and smaller piece of land so it can be given over to Jews in their Jewish state. What happened in Sheikh Jarrah was a kind of fluke. Number one, it was mostly middle-class families who had good connections. Number two, because of the good connections and the good organizing, there was a large number of demonstrations. Number three, the Israeli Jewish supremacists, of course, came in and tried to break up the demonstrations in support of Sheikh Jarrah. Then, that's routine. That's par for the course. Nobody blinks an eye. And then it spilled over to Al Aqsa Mosque. And there was some solidarity expressed by the worshippers in Al Aqsa Mosque. Then they came under assault. Then it happened to have been on Ramadan. Then the attacks happened to have occurred in the holiest day of Ramadan. So it was this whole concatenation, which was totally unpredictable, as politics 99 out of 100 times is. But it began with the most routine, commonplace event that's literally happened every single day, literally every single day for the past 73 years since Israel was founded. This juggernaut, this maw that gobbles up, consumes the Palestinian land, this protracted land robbery. Perfectly honest with you, it's the first 150 years of America. That's what our country was like. If you read the story, just to give you an example, you read the story of the Cherokee Indians. The Cherokees start out on the East Coast. They're dispossessed. They move to North Carolina and Alabama. They sign all these treaties. You can keep this land. We'll give you this land. They signed the treaties. Of course, the United States breaks all the treaties. Before you know it, there's what's called the, oh gosh, how could I forget? It's the famous Cherokee, something like March of Death, but I can't remember it now. Oh God, this is horrible. And then they're moved to they go from Alabama and North Carolina. I forgot where now, but they ended up in the state of Oklahoma when the ratio of whites to Indians in Oklahoma was 10-1, a nice safe ratio. You know what the Israelis call the Jewish majority. Then they turned Oklahoma into a state. They carved it out as a state. It's basically the history of the Americans. It's the history of a lot of states, unfortunately. So it's the same process, the attempt to extinguish, I don't want to say exterminate, I'll just say extinguish the Palestinians as a people. And this is just, as I said, now it came back to me. Thank you, memory. It's called the Trail of Tears. But now I can't remember what state Oklahoma was carved out from. It'll come to me in 10 years. Yeah, it's the same process. And so for those who have a historical memory and are moved by what was done to the Native Americans, it's now happening to the Palestinians. Well, it's been happening for 73 years. It's been happening. It was just a fluke. I mean, the Israelis are so stupid. These Ubermenschen, these geniuses. Remember the Israelis immediately as COVID began. They said, we have the cure. They don't have the cure. But they immediately, the geniuses, we have the cure. They need a cure for mental illness. That's what our country needs, a cure for mental illness. So it's the same process I was about to say, to attack the Palestinians in Al Aqsa Mosque on the holiest day of Ramadan, that's not brilliant. Not brilliant. But they're so arrogant. They are so arrogant, these people, so obnoxious. The other day, 2 days ago, this guy, Shlomo Ben Quinn, I don't know, he was a correspondent of mine. He's probably around 21, 22. I don't know how old he is. And I correspond with everybody. I don't discriminate. You don't like me? Fine, just be respectful. And he writes me this email talking down to me, carrying on like he's superior to me. I just said, you know what? I said, you fucking Nazi Jewish supremacist sack of shit. Don't talk to me that way. Don't talk to me that way. I said, you get it, you stupid fuck? I'm sick of these people. The arrogance of these people nauseate me. They think they can go into a mosque on the highest holy day, not just a mosque, Al Aqsa Mosque, on the highest holy day of their religious holiday, and they can carry on as they please, and there'll be no reaction. And then they're shocked. They're shocked. Hamas react. Oh, they're so shocked. Hamas, if you read these Israeli analysts, they were probably calculating this, calculating that, calculating that, calculating that. Maybe they were just really sickened by what was happening. Now, I'm not going to deny Hamas calculates. I'm not going to deny that. They're a political party. They calculate. But maybe they were touched by the fact that the Palestinians were being evicted from East Jerusalem, their homes, and 70% of Gaza's population, they are refugees who were evicted from their homes. So maybe there was some resonance there. And we all agree the Hamas leadership is very religious. So maybe they were genuinely indignant, and that's a very euphemistic word, at the attacks on worshippers in Al Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which happens to be the Palestinian capital according to international law, on the highest holy day of Ramadan. They can't even comprehend it, these Israelis, because they think the Arabs are subhuman. They do. Untermenschen. Subhumans.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Dr. Norman, I just don't want you to miss your interview. So I just want to remind you of the time. We could have you on for hours. Really, we could listen to you nonstop. And the questions,
no, we wouldn't want to, because eventually I'll forget my name. That's where my memories go.
It's really been great listening to you and learning from you. And we hope we can have you on again and we can talk to you again in the future. Yeah, we wish you all the best with your interviews and all the best in general, and hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Norman.
Apologies for the language to the audience, but obviously it's a very emotive topic areas and situations. And also just to remind as well the audience that might not realize, but Dr. Norman Finkelstein is actually of a Jewish heritage. I think it's his parents, or maybe his grandparents, I'm not exactly sure, but they were actually in concentration camps in Nazi Germany as well.
So I have that clip. I could play that clip. It's only a short one as well, where basically there's a student who's trying to sort of pull the whole Jewish card thing to him, like it's not relevant to him as well. It's quite. One second, I'll pull it up. It'll be better. I'll let him speak with his own words.
During your speech, you made a lot of references to Jewish people as well as certain people in your audience, not Jewish people in general, but certain people, especially in your audience, to Nazis. Now, that is extremely offensive when certain people are German. And they're also extremely offensive to people who've actually suffered under Nazi rule.
I don't respect that anymore. I really don't. I don't like and I don't respect the crocodile tears to the crocodile tears. No, I'm sorry, folks. Allow me to finish and allow me to finish. Listen, sir. Allow me to finish. Allow me to finish. Sir. I don't like to play before an audience the Holocaust card. But since now I feel compelled to. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother, please shut up. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on my father's side,
the Jews did not take arms against the
my
Germans.
late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it's precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's being done.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah, so that really gets a point across very well. First of all, his own history. So he's not just some random person. He has connection to the Jewish people, and you can't say, oh, he's biased here or there. Like he's obviously clearly quite passionate about this. He's clearly done his research into the whole problem itself. And he's not shy to quite clearly express his opinion as well.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention as well. He talks about Sheikh Jarrah as well, and he mentioned the point, which is that because what you find within the sort of the pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist media and commentators, they try to give this impression as though this was just a land dispute. Why is it Muslims are getting upset? Why the Palestinians getting upset? The title deeds were owned by some Israelis, etc., etc. As though this is just some sort of legal dispute and the Palestinians have no legal leg to stand on. One thing that needs to be really understood is the application of the law in Israel when it comes to the Palestinians and when it comes to Israelis, or what they call Israelis now. Yeah. When it comes to land disputes, let's say, for example, those Muslims, 70% of whom in Gaza, who have been evicted unlawfully, illegally from their homes in Israel, they can't just go and present a legal document, deeds from 1896, or from whatever year, and say, actually, this is my land. Yeah, I actually own this land. They will say, no, you're no longer considered a citizen of this country. Therefore, you have no legal recourse to go and claim your land. Yeah. So they have this double standards that on the one hand, they will say, yeah, well, they had legal documents from 1896 or whatever it is. They have the right to that particular land. But when it comes to the opposite way, they don't do it. And that's the whole point I think Dr. Norman Finkelstein is saying. He's saying is that they're using the system to remove the people from the land, from the Palestinians from the land, to therefore change the demographics. So when it suits them, they'll come out with the law, but when it doesn't suit them, then they'll discard the law and say, actually, you're not considered citizens. And it should also be noted, this is East Jerusalem. So even under international law, it's not even considered part of Israeli jurisdiction. You know, they're considered illegal occupiers within that. So it's like as though somebody from Mexico, you know, the Mexican government, you know, are coming in for a legal dispute within Canada. You know, people would turn around and say, that's crazy. What jurisdiction do they have in terms of trying to solve this issue? So, you know, let's just be really clear. This is not like just a simple legal dispute between two parties of equal footing. This is the use of the legal system to promote the change of demographics and remove the Palestinians while it's being unequally applied. Yeah, regards to this. Just so people, and I think also the Yusuf, there's that really good picture as well, which shows, you know, Palestine, the green. Yes. So, you know, again, he was talking about how only 3% prior to 1947 or so, you know, was under Jewish control. And you can see from this picture, and I'm sure many of the audience members have seen this picture, you can see how smaller and smaller, the landmass of the Palestinians has become, how they've been pushed quite literally into islands and to the margins within their own land that they've lived there for centuries. And in fact, when it says present, it's actually from 2005. So you probably got less of the Greenland there.
Yeah, and it's also, I guess, important to mention here as well. There was the whole UN partition plan, and in this, the Palestinians, although they made up the majority of the population when this whole thing occurred, I think they made up like 69% of the total population. They owned 92% of the total land mass, yet they were given 43% of the land, and the Zionists were given the best quality land in that deal as well, despite the fact that they owned 8% of the land. They made up maybe just less than a third of the population, and they were still given the majority of the land on top of that. And you can sort of see how, like, so I think the partition plan is the one on the second image. So it says partition plan 1947. That was the deal that was basically cut for them. And this is important when you look at that and you think that they were a third of the population. They owned 8% of the land. The 92% of it was owned by Palestinians, and subhanAllah, they still ended up with the large majority share out of that. And then you can see as the time moved on, they slowly expanded further and further and further until you have this very isolated. You can see on the last picture where it says present. So there's a particular sort of plan that they have in place. I'm going to share, and if you haven't seen this documentary yet, I really want you all to go away and to watch it. I'll put the link in the description, inshallah. If the mods are watching, Riyad, if you're watching, could you please put that in the description, and I'll post it in the comments as well, or if one of you brothers could post it in the comments. But it's a brilliant documentary that really expresses the huge issues that are going on with the Israeli-Palestinian occupation, which is what it is. It's an occupation of a foreign force in Palestinian lands, and the Palestinians are living under the iron fist of these people. So I'm just going to share this now. Let me full screen that. And so there's a short 2-minute video here that I'm going to play a segment off this documentary, which just explains what's going on at the present moment with what's left of the Palestinian territories.
Here you have Palestinians that have no input whatsoever in the policies that are made. They're not on the city council. They're not in any of the decision-making bodies in the West Bank or Gaza. They're certainly not in the government. The policies are made in order to ensure Israeli control. So the law is designed in a very cynical way to prevent Palestinians from building and to keep them confined in little islands, so that most of the land of the occupied territories is free for Israeli settlement.
These are armed settlements, about 190 of them spread all over the West Bank.
Settlements are strategically built colonies of Israel that are connected by a network of roads which separate each Palestinian community from the next and confine their ability to expand. They are often constructed around the best farmland and water resources.
They are surrounded by barbed wire. They are armed inside. Settler residents are required to be armed by the Israeli military, and they are defended from the outside by the Israeli military itself.
The purpose of these settlements today, number one, is to continue the Israeli control and domination of the occupied territories.
And the bottom line in all of this is to make Palestinians leave the country. It's a very hard term, I know, but in a sense, it's a kind of ethnic cleansing.
You could see there with the image that even the roads that are very strategically placed around settlements, the Palestinians are not allowed to use many of these roads. So if they're caught with a vehicle on one of these roads, they can have that vehicle confiscated, they can be arrested. And it's not just a way of obviously allowing the settlements that the Israelis have planted there, obviously to get from one settlement to the next. But it works very much like a wall as well, in the sense that the Palestinians can't even move from one Palestinian community to the next. They're being fractured into small isolated units, and then slowly chipped away at. There's the Zionists that are frequently caught. They'll just walk into some homes. There'll be Palestinians that have lived there for generations. They own the land. It is theirs. And this idea that it's simply like militants of things like it's not that. It's families. It's women, children. Let's look at the statistics here as well. So, there's a large portion of these people that are being killed are children, and they're not stopping at just killing men. They're killing women, children, the elderly. Like they're indiscriminate about it, and they'll just walk into a family home, not a militant base. These people aren't active in any sort of resistance. They're just people that live in a home, and the Israelis will just move in and say, no, we're taking this from you now. We're having it. This is ours. And they won't leave. And they'll just stay there. And then if the Palestinians get angry, which would be quite rightfully so, if someone just came into my house now and said, I'm living here now, I was like, what are you on about? This is my home. I live here. No, we're living here now. If I was to get angry at that, which I would, I can guarantee you, then I think I would be perfectly within my right. But no, what happens here is that the Zionists, the Israelis, will then call for the Israeli Defense Force or the military, the Israeli military, and the military will come. And instead of telling them, listen, what you're doing, you're stealing someone's house. This is illegal. This is against also not just like law within the land itself, but within international law. You can't just steal people's homes. Instead of like telling them, listen, what you've done here is illegal, they stand and defend the land for them. They protect the Zionists that have moved into these people's homes. And subhanAllah, that documentary outlines a lot of these problems, and how this is a common tactic. So we've got another short video here, which shows it's only 1 minute, but it shows an exchange between an Israeli Zionist with a Palestinian who's literally just. Go on.
I think that's Sheikh Jarrah. That's one of the footages that was taken from one of the eviction orders notice at Sheikh Jarrah.
This one
of the houses. Yeah.
So this is just a 1 minute clip, but it explains in such a profound way.
I might have made a mistake. Actually, this might not be the Sheikh Jarrah one, but still, yeah.
The point still stands. It's still this idea of Zionist Israelis just thinking that they have the right simply just to take land of people. Subhanallah.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
So that just, to be honest, that one line is I think sufficient. I'm going to play the rest, but you're stealing my house, and if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it. So there's even this sense of,
and that supposedly makes it right. I mean, it's amazing.
But there's a sense of rush even among the Israelis that they're sort of competing with each other to steal.
They're
land.
fighting with each other to try to steal somebody else's house and property.
Because if he doesn't do it now, someone else will, and then that is going to be a loss for him. So they see it. You know, there's an anxiety. You can. SubhanAllah. Let's just play the rest of the video.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي. Yaakov, you know this is not your house.
Yeah, it was Sheikh Jarrah. It said then. It's occupied East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood.
Yaakov, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
it's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house. You are stealing my house.
If I don't steal it, someone else.
SubhanAllah. And this isn't like, people don't need to think this isn't just like an isolated incident. You know, this is what explains this. That is how that one on the left goes from being mostly green to that one on the right being a tiny slither. So you've got that little tiny bit. Which bit, can you remind me, which bit is Gaza and which bit is the West Bank? So West Bank is this fragmented bit on the right, and then Gaza is that little tiny strip on the left. Yeah. So that's what Dr. Finkelstein was referring to as like a marathon. You know, the length of a marathon. And you know, this again ties into that notion that we mentioned at the beginning of the stream. This, like, they're using civilians as a human shield. There's nowhere for them to go. They're boxed in.
Yeah, it's apparently one of the most densely populated areas in the world.
Yeah.
Gaza Strip.
And here's some more information, just to kind of, so the red bit, the light red bit that goes up, that's the deaths of the Palestinians. The dark red bit that goes down, that's the Israeli deaths. There's no comparison here. There's not these people are as bad as each other thing going on here at all. No, you have an occupying force who has a huge military advantage. You know, they have very direct airstrikes that hit. They know where they're hitting and what they're hitting. There's no discrimination. They bomb hospitals, they bomb schools, they bomb whatever it is. They're really not bothered.
The problem is, like, as Sharif was saying a while ago, it's like a lot of people, and some of our friends even, are like, well, if the court ruled, you know, then the family should be evicted. It's just the rule of law, right? But I mean, this is just oversimplification of the situation, as if it's like a property dispute in like downtown Manhattan or something, like as if it's within like peaceful conditions and everything is normal, and there's an ordinary property dispute. Why are you guys going crazy when the court rules for eviction? The issue is the history of what's happening in that region. Very recent history is just full of all kinds of evictions, legal and illegal. The establishment of the state of Israel made nearly 700,000 Palestinians lose their home. I think that was in 1947 or 48. And one estimate I read, maybe that's outdated by now, but one estimate I read is that the descendants of those Palestinians are around 7 million right now. Now imagine those 7 million right now. Now, do they have rights to certain properties within Israel? And certain courts can issue, you know, eviction sentences all day long. Is Israel going to respect that? Of course not. So it's quite ironic that it's Israel that's trying to uphold the law here with regard to, you know, an eviction notice and you know, this specific type of litigation, because Israel is known, as Dr. Finkelstein put it, to have that as one of its main foundations and objectives to basically make the majority population and the more majority ownership of lands and property within that region to be a Jewish ownership. So it's quite ironic that they're making it as if they're trying to uphold the law and you don't have right to this place when you've been kicking people out of their houses for nearly a century right now, because as Dr. Finkelstein put it as well, it predates 1948. So yeah, that's the issue. I mean, that simplistic reductive approach to it, and we've had some friends of ours, specifically in the States, kind of give us that strange response. Well, it's a court order, right? It's just there's a lot more context to it.
Yeah, and honestly, the map that Yusuf put up a couple times, if you have a look at that map and you understand the basic historical development of the supposed state of Israel, that goes, even prior to 1947, and then what is occurring in that map, if you look at that and you understand the facts behind it and you still don't see the problem, I'm sorry to say, but there's something wrong with you. I just don't know how to possibly defend it other than you just want to stick your head in the sand and you don't even want to know the facts about the historical development of Israel and what has been going on there for the past 73 years, like Dr. Finkelstein said. Or you're just so biased, it, and you just want to you don't even want to embrace the facts of the matter, the truth of what is happening and what's been happening for the past 73 years. It's absolutely disgusting. Anyone who would defend this, what's happening and what's happening in the image of the map. I mean, just look at the map alone. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think, and maybe Sharif, you can expand on this. I think it's important to note that this isn't a strictly Jewish Muslim issue. This is a Zionist Palestinian or Arab issue, because even Christian Palestinians are being oppressed. And during the mass migrations and the whole plan for the Zionist state of Israel, when that was being laid out and actually when it was materializing, indigenous Jewish populations that lived side by side peacefully among Muslims and Christians for centuries many of them were against the idea of this Jewish state that would basically discriminate against non-Jews, and a lot of them didn't feel the need for it. They were already living there peacefully for centuries, and a lot of Orthodox Jews today are against this Zionist occupation. And in fact, the original Zionist movement was mainly established by secular Jews, not religious Jews, who basically wanted to establish a home for Jews, not necessarily a Jewish state or a Jewish nation. And there's a very important difference. So it's just important to make that distinction, that this Zionist movement that is in control of the region and is oppressing Muslims, Christians, and historically even Jews who weren't okay with the establishment of the Zionist state is not merely a religious movement that wants to take some God-given right to a land.
Yeah, no, and I think I mentioned that earlier on as well at the beginning of the stream, which is that there are many, may not necessarily be the majority of Jews, or certainly Orthodox Jews, but there are many Orthodox Jews that believe from a religious point of view, this is quite important, from a religious point of view, it is not permissible for Jews to enter into Jerusalem, and in fact, not just Jerusalem, but the whole of that Palestine area. And they are pro-Palestinian. These are the ones that, have the sideburns, wear the hat, wear the long black coat. They are the typical, Orthodox Jews who are very much anti-Israel, and also not just anti-Israel from a religious point of view, but also anti-Israel because they see the oppression as well against that. And to the historical development of Zionism, like I said, was by an atheist person of Jewish origin, or atheist Jew. So he was secular. So this wasn't a religious movement, and it was promoted by the British initially, and then later on by other nations, but certainly by the British. by people like Arthur Balfour or later on Winston Churchill, who did so not because of any love they had for Jews and Jewish people, but rather because they themselves saw this as having a geopolitical interest for them. And even then, they themselves expressed really highly anti-Semitic views. So, for example, this is what Churchill said. I've got a quote here, and I just want to read it out. And he's so I think this quote is actually related to the Palestinians themselves. Yeah. So I'm just so I'll leave that particular one, but I know certainly Churchill himself had very negative things to say against Jews. Arthur Balfour of the Balfour Declaration, he actually wanted to prohibit or prevent Jewish people from emigrating or immigrating into Britain at the time, even though he was promoting this idea. And many Jews who lived in Western nations, European countries like Britain, were against this idea because they said, hold on, if we establish this other country, then we're going to be forcibly removed from Britain and some of these countries into this nation. So, they were against that. And even today, like I mentioned about the Orthodox Jews today. And just as one final point, I want to just add on as well to what Jake was saying about, the map that we keep showing. Now, some people, they think, some non-Muslims think that, it's 75 years ago now. It's from a long time ago. Okay, it was terrible, it was bad, but we just need to move on. But the problem is that this is happening now. So this type of forced removal, these bombings, these attacks, this is happening right now because there is an agenda to try to change the demographics and remove the Palestinian character or the Arab or the Muslim character of this region.
Yeah, and they're doing it by bombing and violence in one way, and then they're doing it like this other clown that's just showing up in your backyard and saying, "I'm taking your land. What are you going to do? If I don't do it, somebody else will." So, I mean, they're doing it both ways, and it's just
the military and the populace are working together on this.
I mean, anybody who can't see that, it's just honestly ridiculous.
They're doing it through, you're right, military. They're doing it through the environment in terms of the way people try to interact. They're doing it through legal means. They're also doing, because I've visited Palestine, I went there a few years ago. They don't provide the economic development in the areas where the Palestinians are. So these are rundown towns and cities, even in the West Bank, in Al Khalil and some of these areas. So these are people, even in Old Jerusalem. Old Jerusalem is split into 4 quarters. You've got the Jewish quarter, the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Muslim quarter. And the Muslim quarter, compared to the Jewish quarter, is like night and day in terms of the redevelopment. So they don't invest. And the reason why they don't invest is because they're trying to create a poor social economic environment that pushes Palestinians out of this land. And what's really interesting is that even though Palestinians are living in really difficult situations economically, in terms of the housing, all these types of things, they think to themselves that this is our obligation to stay in these houses, not to move. The vast majority of them don't want to move. And it's strange because, as a Muslim living in the West, we wouldn't really blame Palestinian Muslims or, leaving their country for, a better environment, better future. But they see this as an act of resistance. They say, if we are not here, and if we are pushed out, if we sell our homes, even though we're living in deprived accommodations, poor economic infrastructure, etc. If we leave, then this means that we will lose Masjid al Aqsa, together. So they see this just being, living in this environment. And as a one other point, just really quickly, is that all they ask when you go over there is to spread the message of what's happening to them, and secondly, for those Muslims who can, to go visit Palestine. Really important. Those who are outside of Palestine, go visit them, help them in terms of buying from their shops, going to the cafes, helping their hotels, because this, helps them economically within the region,
And Sharif, just one last point on that point that you were making about the way that the different quarters of Jerusalem, and you compare the Jewish one to the Muslim one. even listen to what Dr. Norman said about the water supply. I mean, he said 96% of it is not up to the standards. Even the quality of the water, they don't want to give them proper supply. And they give just enough, as he said, just in order for them to survive, barely it. So they're trying to make the place that these people live in an absolute crap hole in hopes of trying to get them out, that they'll just leave on their own. And subhanAllah, they're strong-willed people, and they're, resisting it at all costs, but they definitely need our help.
Yeah, and so I just want to share a video here as well, because obviously we made mention here that this isn't, when we say Palestinian problem, people often hear that and they go, oh, it's just the Muslims. It isn't. It isn't. And this is a great rebuttal to this point that the issue is somehow inherently Islamic, because it isn't just the Muslims that are having this issue at all. The Christians also suffer the exact same thing. And if it was because of an Islamic problem, you wouldn't see this transfer of the problem from the Muslim community to the Christian community. You wouldn't see that at all. And so I'll play this short clip now, and you'll get the point here that it really is a Palestinian problem. That includes even Palestinian Jews as well, but just the Palestinians in general versus the Zionists, not Islam versus Judaism. So we'll play this now.
Trump says that Israel is one of the great democracies in the world. I would say that's the biggest bullshit I've ever had.
We're here in Bethlehem, home to an ancient Palestinian Christian community, to hear what they have to say about Christians in the West supporting Israel, Donald Trump's move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and to see what life is really like here for Christians living in the occupied West Bank.
I always try to tell my child that we don't hate Israelis, but we hate what they are doing to us. My name is Marwan Harb. I'm a Christian living in Palestine, Bethlehem. When I hear that Christians in the West are helping Israel, thinking that they are helping Christians in Palestine, I think they're mistaken. Israel is who to blame. They took everything, man. They took all your life since you're a child.
There's understanding between Christians and Muslims that live here. There's a lot of differences as well.
And who care about us, the Muslim Palestinian, they care more than the Christian in the world. So our brother, they are the Palestinian Muslim, not the Christian in the world.
I tell my brothers and sisters from other nations, Christians, I tell them to support us. My name is Sandy Kumsiya. I'm a Christian Palestinian. We are here in Bethlehem. It's really sad here.
What happens to anyone who speak against the Israeli government here? If they will notice that there's someone might make a threat for them, they will come in less than 10 minutes and take him away and will be in jail.
Some of the most basic rights, human rights, are not given to us.
We have a problem.
You're muted, Yusuf.
You're muted, Yusuf. Can't hear you, dude.
Yeah, sorry. So we don't want to play too much of the same clip just in case it ends up.
I just want to say, because some of the comments they're saying that it's an Islamic issue and this is colonial language. We're not denying that Al Aqsa is an Islamic issue. No one's saying that here. What we're saying is
that's a misunderstanding of the point.
We're that's not what we're saying. We're trying to say that Israeli oppression doesn't really discriminate between Muslim and Christian as far as their objectives are concerned. Whether you're a Muslim or you're a Christian, if you get in the way, they'll remove you, they'll deal with you, and the oppression does reach Christians. That doesn't negate the fact that it is an Islamic issue in the sense that we have a religious obligation towards Al-Aqsa. So
So
no one's denying that.
No. So maybe I didn't word it very well. So when I was saying it's not an Islamic issue, I was referring specifically to the justifications given by the Zionist government. That is, that they are trying to say, no, the only reason we're doing this is because Islam is ordering them to be evil terrorists, X, Y, Z. That's not what's going on here. There's specifically a problem with the methods and the whole philosophy behind the Zionist movement, which bleeds across the communities, not just the Muslims. Obviously, Al-Aqsa is most certainly an Islamic issue, and I wasn't trying to deny that in any way. So yeah, just apologies there if what I said wasn't clear or made you think that I was trying to say otherwise.
No, you were talking about the oppression that's happening to the Palestinians in general, and taking their land and bombing them and all that kind of stuff. That's what Yusuf was clearly talking about, and as is evident in the clip we just played, I mean, the one Christian guy literally said, "Well, the Muslim Palestinians that are here are more of our brothers than the Christians around the world." Because their support, many Christians, especially evangelicals in the U.S., they're supporting Israel. They're pro-Israel. They don't even, I don't know if it's that they don't understand what's really going on, and that's part of the reason we're making this video, to educate people. But I mean, there's just, especially recently, and with the internet, there's just so much online. I just can't even find much room for excuse for people anymore. It's just very difficult to excuse people at this point. And I think that's what the guy is saying. Like, you know, it's just obvious what's going on here. You guys have been, for the Christians, many of them have just, especially in the US and things like that, have just kind of deserted these people. Yeah. And, you know, it's really a shame. I don't think it is as much a religious issue in that aspect. It's kind of the Zionists versus the Arabs and the Palestinians in that aspect. But there is a religious element when it comes to Al Aqsa and things surrounding East Jerusalem and the Muslims there, etc.
Yeah,
but you know.
And our brother here is talking about military conquest, whether we're against military conquest in principle, because there might be a double standard with regard to Islamic conquest. And I think that's reading a bit into what we're saying. I think we are being very specific in speaking about certain atrocities that this supposed military conquest is resulting in. It's not that any kind of military, I mean, personally, from my limited knowledge on the issue, I wouldn't say that military conquests are evil per se. It just depends on what results of your military conquests and what your motive is for the military conquest, and how you treat the indigenous people, and your overall moral framework as a civilization or as an empire through which you approach these kinds of issues. So I think we're being very specific here in targeting specific inhumane acts that the Israeli occupation engages in, and that is specifically what we are against. So yeah, let's not broaden that into just a very loose understanding of politics in general.
Yeah, and this is completely, like, you know, just to add to the point, it's night and day issue. So, you know, it's not comparable at all. You know, when the Muslims entered various lands, yeah, whether that's through military conquest or through treaty, and Jerusalem, by the way, was entered through treaty. It was, you know, with the patriarchs who were controlling and ruling that particular city, and Umar radiallahu anh came. What you found was that you didn't find this mass genocide or displacement of the original population. In fact, you would have cities that would maintain its own religious character. Yeah, so there would be cities in which they were able to have their churches, their synagogues, their places of worship. They were allowed to, you know, administer their own local affairs. You know, the type of environment that Islam created within these societies meant that when those Jews were expelled and Muslims were expelled from Islamic Spain at the time, they didn't necessarily all go to Europe. In fact, many of them came back to the Muslim world. They either went later on to Istanbul or they came to North Africa and other parts of the Muslim world. So, you know, it's incomparable. You wouldn't think that the Palestinians, after being treated the way they are, would want to go back to Israel to live under Zionist rule. Yeah, they wouldn't want to do that, you know, because they didn't like the particular Zionist. It was oppressive to them. But you found that the Jews themselves actually wanted to go back and live under Islamic rule and preferred Islamic rule than Christian rule at the time. So there's no comparison. This was a land that was colonized by the British. The British then unilaterally gave this over to Zionists within Europe. those came over to establish the land. They established or they were given the land by the British through acts of terrorism post World War II. The British pressurized, also gave them this particular land as a way to further their own geopolitical interests within the region. America also supports the continuation of the state of Israel, again for geopolitical reasons within the Middle East. So these are not for the sake of justice, for the sake of people living in an harmonious lifestyle. This was created as a way for Western states to maintain their hegemony, their control and influence within the wider Middle East through their quote unquote military base of Israel within this nation.
And I think we can say it a bit explicitly here. So if there were to be an Islamic military conquest or a Muslim military conquest that basically had the same ideological background and committed the same atrocities as the Israeli state did, if a Muslim state treated Jews in the same way Israel is treating Muslims, we would be explicitly against that, just as much as we are against Israel right now. So I mean, it's not about the conquest per se, or it's not about even expansionism per se. It's about the moral framework that you have to offer and the implementation of that moral framework in the land, which results in either good, which we hope for and we support, or results in the atrocities we're seeing within the Middle East right now.
Yeah, I wanted to also just sort of raise a quick point, maybe not go into as much detail, but I do think we need to mention it because also Dr. Norman Finkelstein did mention it, which is the wider Muslim world, particularly the surrounding countries around the state of Israel, how there's been at the most strongly worded statements by some of these rulers within the Muslim world, but in many cases there's pretty much been silence. And in fact, many of the government scholars or prominent scholars within this region have been pretty silent regards to this area. And I think it's important that we know that, at the end of the day, understanding that this is more than just quote unquote a nationalistic problem within Palestine. This is an Islamic issue. It's about Muslim land. It's about Al Aqsa Mosque. It's about protecting human beings. Whoever they are, that's under oppression. That therefore it's an Islamic issue. That those regimes within this region and even the wider region in terms of the Muslim world have an obligation, have a responsibility to ensure the liberation and the protection of these people. Now, some people might say, well, Muslims are not powerful enough. They can't, physically remove, Israel, all these such things. But there's many things, many political acts that the Muslim world could do. And I'm talking about from a state level. For example, it could be the case that there could be an oil embargo and gas. We know that the majority of the world's petroleum and gasoline come from the Muslim world. I think it's about 50% comes from the Muslim world in terms of gas. And obviously significant amounts of petrol come. Now, if they were able to turn around and say, we will stop any exports to any country that openly supplies or trades with Israel, while they're, undertaking the actions that they're doing, then what would happen straight away? You would see pressure being put upon the state of Israel by people like America or by Britain to stop their violence against the Palestinians. So there are political measures that can be undertaken by the Muslim world. They could help in other ways as well. And also, we need to go back to our own particular history in terms of when we look at, the last time Palestine and Jerusalem was occupied during the time of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah. I think, if audience members, we know that he helped liberate Jerusalem. He didn't go in there to massacre the people, like the Crusaders when they first came into Jerusalem. He created peace and stability that then lasted for another 1,000 years or so within that particular region. So, but what was really interesting is Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah, he spent from 1172, around about that time, to 1187 or 86, 1186. So about 14-year period. by which he worked to unify the Muslim lands, because some of the Muslim lands, like the Fatimid Egypt, they were providing resources and transportation of trade routes to the Crusaders. So he worked to unify these different regions. And then once he unified them, 1186, when he unified these regions, it only took him less than a year by which he was able to liberate Jerusalem. And so obviously, we face a very similar situation today. We have division within the Muslim lands on a political level, as well as, nationalistic divisions. We need to work towards that unification under a sincere leadership, like we had in the past. And then, inshallah, we can act as a coherent body of an ummah. We are 1.7 billion of us. We have 70% of the world's oil resources, 50% of the world's gas resources. You have hundreds of thousands of, millions, in fact, of military personnel, etc., who can provide the peacekeeping forces to help liberate and ensure peace and stability within this region.
So here is another question. If I understand you correctly, you would be supporting a one-state solution of an Israeli state that upholds minimal Palestinian rights. No need to take take back any land, right? There are multiple issues here. So first of all, when you speak about Israel, you have to speak about the Zionist, the ideological framework that they work within, and you can't separate the two. You can't separate Israel from Zionism, that basically prioritizes the existential concerns of Jews of the world, whether or not they are linked indigenously to the land of Palestine, over any kinds of concerns that Arabs would have. It's explicitly juxtaposed with the existence of Arabs. So it would be like me asking you, for example, would you support ISIS if they were to be a global government that upholds the rights of people? Well, that's a strange question, because the ideology of the organization does have a terrorist background and does have a discriminatory approach towards achieving its goals, and a violent approach towards achieving its goals. So it's almost as if you're asking me about a hypothetical state that wouldn't be Israel, right? So Israel, as it is right now, there are 7 million Palestinians who have rights to those lands. So I get what you're saying in terms of taking back lands, because that's a difficult question with regard to Jews, Israeli Jews who were born in Palestine. That's not a question I'm prepared to answer. I'm not qualified to answer that. I think it's a difficult situation. But you also have to keep in mind that there are 7 million Palestinians who've been displaced who have rights to those lands. So if the Palestinians do return, and if they do form the core of the state or the society, that the hypothetical society that you're aiming for here, then there are equal rights, and there is a sort of we do get rid of this criminal approach towards achieving these political goals and these war crimes that Israel is committing, then we wouldn't be talking about Israel anymore. So right now you're describing something completely different. So sure, I'm all for a one-state solution, but when you take everything into consideration and the rights of Palestinians to return to their lands, their rightfully owned lands, then when you're thinking of a one-state solution, you're really thinking of a Palestinian state. Because this, as Sharif put it earlier, this is a problem that is ongoing. This isn't a problem that's like millennia or centuries old, and we've resolved it, and already you have a state that isn't involved in war crime and subjugating its people. No, this is an ongoing issue where you have a criminal occupying state that is oppressing its people and that has removed people from their lands and has denied them of the right for return, while giving Jews of the entire world, any Jew in the world, literally could move right now to Palestinian land and occupy it as a settler under Israeli protection. So that's the state we're describing. So if that's the one solution state you're looking for, then that's just as good as me telling you, what about ISIS taking control of Palestine? I don't think I'd accept ISIS just as much as I wouldn't accept Israel.
I think there's an even better example than ISIS, to be honest. But the first thing is this: is Zionism was an idea that Jews should be favored in a particular land. Yeah. So, and that Jews are a specific race. I've always found it really strange, because if Jews are a specific race and you favor a race over a particular land in terms of the politics, economics within that society, then that's a racist state. And if you've got a racist state like that, then how can you call for equal rights? This would be like saying, well, Nazi Germany, yeah, they can remain Nazis so long as they treat everybody equally. Well, the very predication of the system of governance is built upon this idea, of favoring one group of people over the other. So, nobody would argue that. Nobody would have argued that, Soviet Union, if you're a capitalist, you don't argue that Soviet Union can remain a communist state. No, you say, well, it should change. It's a political structure. You're not talking about the extermination of peoples. You're just talking about the political framework that changes. In the same way, when people argued against apartheid South Africa, they're talking about the political system that's changing. And as Muslims, we have we don't have like a, theoretical discussion about solutions. We have 1,000-year history of solutions of how Muslims, non-Muslims, Jews, Christians, people of no religion all came together and lived under a system. Yeah. So we have that practically applied. So it's a case of just simply learning about that and try to implement that. But I think Jake wanted to jump in. Sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on something that Sharif was saying earlier, not with that comment, but about Muslim governments in particular and scholarship. I think largely it's failed the Palestinian issue that's been ongoing for, as you said, the past 75 or so years. And I just have to be quite frank. I mean, really shame on these people who not only are they not really, for the most part, as far as I can tell, helping the Palestinian people, but they're actually supporting Israel in many cases. And it's honestly disgusting. It's, to me, it's really shameful. These people are in a position, as Sharif said, to where they could offer help to the Palestinians, or at least not be helping the government of Israel, in which many cases they are. And it's really sad. I wish that things would change, but it seems that greed and political power are more important to some of these supposed Muslim governments rather than the sanctity of human life as well as Muslim life. And it's a really sad state of affair that the Ummah is currently in. And I ask that Allah would reconcile this issue and help us.
Guys, I don't know if somebody in the chat is saying Abdul conflating ISIS with state as though that's our 1,400-year legacy. Is that what anybody understood from me?
No. Okay. Sometimes, listen, guys. Sometimes
you missed the point, Salim.
You just gotta ignore
I was just worried that that's what it sounded like, because that would be horrible. I'm using ISIS as an example. That's like ISIS is basically a parallel to Israel. By no means a representation of 1,400 years of Islamic civilization. I don't
even know how that.
I just hope that's
why would you even think that we would say that?
Exactly.
We're just trying ridiculous, guys. Like anybody who's been watching us enough should know we would never say something as ridiculous as that. So,
but it's a huge non sequitur from what you said as well, though, Abdulrahman. It's not.
Yeah, I was just worried if anybody understood.
No. There was no rational way of jumping to that conclusion from the comments that you made. So I think we just leave
Thankfully.
that. So before, because we've been going on for just over 2 hours now. So there's another thing I just wanted to share here. I'll mention the two things. We've got some videos that I've uploaded as well. So we could maybe play some of them. So I'll ask you which ones do you reckon we play. So we've got here. There's a video from a channel where a gentleman, he goes around Israel asking people questions. He asks an Israeli or he asks Palestinians, and he basically documents the answers that are given. So there's one here.
That's a very underrated channel, by the way. It's a very,
it is
very
definitely
good channel.
And so the channel, I think it's called Corey Gill Schuster. And actually, he's got 210,000 subscribers. But this particular video here is a 10-minute one, and it's asking Israelis, do the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, use proportional force with Gaza? And the answers are themselves quite shocking. So he's not, like, he doesn't know these people. He's literally just picking random people from the street to discuss things with, asking them, you know, what their thoughts are, and then getting their responses. The second video is basically London Orthodox Jews that are against Israel. They're obviously not the majority of Jews. I think even within the Jewish community themselves, that they can be considered quite the minority. But there's still quite a lot of families, or Jewish families, that are against the Israeli state and consider it like contrary to their religious beliefs. That is that, you know, within the Bible itself, or within the Torah, the Jewish understanding was that that Israel was taken away from them, from within their own paradigm, because of their disobedience to God, and that they're not supposed to have that land given back to them until their Messiah returns and gives it to them. And so any sort of movement to take this land prior to that is against the will of God. And so that they've got their own narrative with regards to that. Which one do you reckon we pull up first? Or?
Get the one with the rabbis, the Orthodox Jews, who are critical of the state of Israel. You've got that one, is it? I think it's a minute clip.
So this one's a 2-minute clip from Ruptly, RT News, where it's just London Orthodox Jews burn the Israeli flag. Is there another one that you could maybe recommend, or that you would like me to pull up in particular?
I think there's one where there's Orthodox Jews who are
what are they called? The neutral. How do you spell then?
I think it's spelled Neturei. Carter spelled Karta.
Torah Carter.
Netura Carter.
Right, I'll share the screen. You tell me if I've spelled that right. Obviously, we don't want to play one that's too long.
Yeah, just play one which is like a minute clip or something.
There's one here. I'll just play that one.
Yeah, go on.
Jews believing in God. The state of Israel cannot speak in our name. We are Jews believing in God, and there are atheists that don't believe in God. They're going against God. So that's the message that we want to bring out. Oh, we're banning the Israeli flag every year on Purim. Purim is the day that marks up the victory of the good side on the bad side. Purim is a day what we try to wipe out. I mean, we can't wipe out with hands, but we speak to God and we ask him to wipe out Amalek. Amalek, the Satan, is the bad side. In every generation, you have something what it symbolizes, the bad side, the side of Amalek, the side of Satan. In today's day, this is the state of Israel. The state of Israel is a rebellion against God. God sent us in exile, asked us to stay in exile, not to go out by our own power.
Yeah, and the ultra Orthodox have quite a few issues themselves within Israel as well, don't they? I'm always reading in the news there's some sort of conflicts between them and even the Israeli government, and I'm guessing a lot of it's along the lines of the laws that the secular nation is sort of putting forward that go contrary to many of the things that the Jews believe in terms of the law. So yeah, so that's another thing. Was there anything else you think you guys would like to watch? We could go through one of them videos as well. We don't obviously have to watch all of it. There's a particular bit where they begin to interview a guy, and they basically say, we can. I'll tell you what, I'll just bring it up. And we don't have to watch all of it, but we can go through bits. And this is the position of the general public here.
צה"ל משתמש בכוח פרופורציונלי עם עזה. לא. כן. רגע. לא. לא, למה?
למה? כן. אני חושב שמגיע להם קצת יותר חזק לתת להם.
יותר חזק?
ברור. והרבה יותר חזק. אולי ככה הם יבינו את המקום שלהם, ואת המשבצת שלהם, ואת הבית שלהם.
אוקיי, אז זה באמת תפתור את הבעיה, כאילו?
עכשיו אנחנו רוצים, אתה שאלת שאלה אחרת. אתה אמרת שאלה אחת. אני עניתי לך. עכשיו אם ניכנס לזה לא נגמור. אם אתה שואל אותי, אני מבחינתי להרוג את כולם שם.
So yeah, he just like outright says if it was up to him, he'd kill them all. And it doesn't get much better. Like,
yeah, I think we can answer this question. Sharif can answer this question. Then we can maybe end it. Brother Sharif.
Oh, right.
The floor is yours.
Yes, I think what he's saying is that, oh, right, okay, because, you know, in Islam, the Ahlul Dhimma are not treated equally. But in origin, the Ahlul Dhimma and the Muslims are treated as citizens. That's treated in origin. This is in origin. There are distinctions that are made. The Ahlul Dhimma, so non-Muslims who live as citizens under the Islamic State, they have greater rights than Muslims who live outside of the Islamic State. So let's be really clear about that. So the right to housing, shelter, the right to be protected, all of these things, when they live within the Islamic State, they have greater rights than any Muslim who lives outside of the Islamic State. Secondly, like I said, is that in origin, they are treated equally. Thirdly, is that where there is distinctions made, the distinctions made based upon their particular religious observances. So, for example, they're not obligated to fast, whereas Muslims are obligated to fast. They're not obligated to pay zakat, but Muslims are obligated to pay zakat. When it comes to personal matters in terms of like food, drink, clothing, then they can adhere to that according to their own religious scripture. When it comes to the issue of courts with regards to personal matters like marriage, divorce, inheritance right, custody, etc., then again that goes down to what their particular court system agrees. They don't have to go to the Islamic courts with regards to this, although the Muslims would do. So, from an Islamic paradigm point of view, in terms of the society that Islam creates, yes, it treats them equally and there are distinctions. But in fact, those distinctions are probably distinctions that Muslims like myself living in the West would rather have than living under one system of secular law. I would like to live under a system in which my religious aspects in terms of personal matters of marriage, divorce, inheritance, etc., is according to the Sharia. But obviously we don't have that within this. And certainly the minorities don't have that within secular systems, whether they're Christian or Jew or other. They all have to live under a secular system. Whereas under an Islamic system, Islam allows the recognition of these courts and the executions of these particular rulings, and also allows them to do certain things, like, for example, drink alcohol in the privacy of their own home, even though it's prohibited for Muslims to do the same thing, and they can be punished. But for Jews and Christians, so long as they're not going out there and opening bars and restaurants, they can engage that in the privacy of their own homes. So, yeah, it's night and day. I'm telling you, wallahi, it is night and day comparison. That's why non-Muslim communities, Christian communities, Orthodox Christian communities, Jewish communities have lived within Muslim lands for centuries. If it was so bad, and you had Coptic Christians, Orthodox Christians in Egypt, why didn't they leave and go to Constantinople at the time? Yeah, why didn't they go to Greece if it was so bad? They lived and they prospered. And in fact, when there was this iconography, the controversy with regards to icons, under Orthodox Christianity, those that believed in it, like the Coptic Christians, were being persecuted by the Orthodox Christians of the Byzantine Empire, but they weren't persecuted under the Islamic rulership and system. So, it's just, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's on.
So yeah, no, I think it did. It pretty well.
That's good.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show the end of this clip. So it's the same video we were watching earlier where he's going around interviewing people, and the things that this particular person now is going to say are quite shocking. So let me play that, and obviously keep in mind as well. So these are the statistics here. Let's pull them up again. Of who is being killed and how many. So the Palestinians, you can see there's a huge amount of children that are being killed. There are videos of Israelis targeting children as well. There's a whole thing that's been done by is it Empire Files? There's the woman that used to work for RT News. I can't remember her name, and she's done a documentary on this particular thing as well about the active aiming at children that are Palestinian and killing them, knowing not by mistake, not as like simply collateral damage, but them being killed as well. And so you see this sort of mentality or this ethos being expressed here. So let us.
אתה היית בצבא? לא. אתה היית במעמד שאתה יושב בתוך איזה עמדה וזורקים עליך אבנים?
כן, דווקא כן.
כן?
כן.
בתור מה? בתור שמאלני שעומד
לא,
מנגד
לא,
איזושהי הפגנה?
בתור מישהו זר בחברון, בצד הפלסטיני, והם לא ידעו שאני יהודי, וזרקו עליי אבנים, ילדים.
ואיך זה גרם לך להרגיש?
נוראי, זה הילדים קטנים, וכולם צחקו, כל המבוגרים צחקו, חשוב שזה מצחיק, שהם זורקים אבנים על אזנבי, על foreigners, אנשים זרים.
אוקיי, ואם היה לך רובה ביד, מה היית עושה באותו רגע?
ממש, א', אני לא הולך עם רובה, ב', לא הייתי יורה
באופן היפותטי.
היפותטי לא הייתי יורה בילד, בכלל לא, אין מצב כזה.
אני הייתי יורה לו בראש על מנת להרוג.
I would shoot him in the head if he had a gun. So let me. If you had a gun in your hand, what would you do at that moment?
So I have to say that I wasn't watching. So when you said that, I was like, "What is Yusuf saying?" Yeah, carry on. I thought you were saying you would shoot him.
No. I'm reading what's being said here. So the gentleman that's interviewing this person now is saying if he had a gun, he doesn't have one, first of all, and second of all, he wouldn't shoot a child if he had it. And he's saying, let's talk hypothetically. Hypothetically, I would not shoot a child. Not at all. There is no way. I would shoot him in the head in order to kill him. And then the interviewer says, what, an 8-year-old child? And he says, yes. If he threw a stone at me, I'd shoot him in the head to kill him. Other questions. Just nonchalantly, just, you know, like he's talking about, you know, what kind of chocolate you buy from a shop or something. SubhanAllah. It's not like this is a serious issue. When people downplay this, and as if this isn't like a huge problem within the sort of the Zionist mentality that, like, you know, really explains these statistics. Like, what on earth going on here?
Yeah.
What on earth is going on here?
Yeah.
SubhanAllah.
And they have the audacity to say they have the right to defend themselves. I mean, it's just the numbers really speak for themselves, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think we've said enough there. We should just end this by praying for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and hoping that we can do that, whatever is within our capacity to do to help the brothers and sisters in Palestine. And hope that Allah alleviates this hardship sooner better than later, inshallah.
Ameen. May Allah make it easy for them. May Allah protect them. May Allah give them patience.
Ameen.
And may Allah curse the oppressors.
Ameen.
So we'll finish it there today, brothers and sisters and ladies and gentlemen, all who have tuned in to watch. Please do share this. I would usually ask you to like, but it's not really a subject that I think is even worthy of a like. So don't bother liking. Just share the video. Leave your comments. Let us know what you think. Show your support for the Palestinians. Show your support for all of those, because obviously this is one. I think as well. This probably undermines many of the other notions of issues that we're currently facing elsewhere in the world. So you've got the problem with the Uyghurs, the problem with Kashmir, with the way that the Indian government are currently dealing with that, and with the Muslims within their own state. And the list goes on. There's huge problems around the world, and the Ummah needs your dua. The Ummah needs your support. The Ummah needs your voice, your action. You need to speak about these kind of things, and we do need to work towards fixing them in some way. And obviously the problems are highly complex, and how do we fix them? At the moment, Allahu Alam, but it requires a conversation. It requires the discussion. And inshallah, may Allah protect us all, guide us all onto the straight path, bring us closer to Him, and make this a means of forgiveness for those who are currently going through the oppression. But other than that, is there any closing statements or words from anyone else before we end it there?
No.
Okay. So Jazakallah khair to everyone watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
حي على